Good evening, Internet. We return again to another fantastic, fabulous episode of Behind the Curve with Matt and Andrew.
Behind the Curve, where it's fantasy month every month.
What? All right.
For the record, what is fantasy month? Is it February or is it? I forget.
I thought it was November.
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head, though. But it is fantasy month every month. We are going to be discussing the classic film Spirited Away.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. So,
You were a first timer. I actually introduced it to you, but I think you knew what it was before I told you.
Yeah, I did know what it was until, but I had never seen it until you kidnapped me and made me watch it. It was fun. I was actually really glad that I got a chance to watch it because I've been looking at it for a long time. I used to have. Do you remember the old Viz videos? The ones that Viz kids used to make.
Viz a dubbing company?
Yeah, but they had an ad for Spirited Away before Pokemon before Pokemon videos. I used to have 2 Pokemon videos, and they used to have.
I didn't really do Pokemon until much later in my life, so I do remember. I think I almost want to say a Disney VHS. Like I definitely remember seeing Studio Ghibli ads though.
Yeah, I did see an ad for Spirited Away. I also saw an ad for Inuyasha, I think, but that might have been something else entirely.
Was this for manga or the anime?
For the anime.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember where I saw it though. All right, so
I'm actually unfortunately significantly anime illiterate because I just spent so much time on movies that actually, believe it or not, Higurashi is a current anime I'm sort of kind of watching right now.
Which one?
Higurashi, When They Cry.
Okay. I haven't had much of time to watch much of the anime thing lately.
Or anything in general, probably.
Yeah, no, I have not had time to do much in general. I do remember when I was little, I forget, there was one time I was flipping around and I was trying to put on the, remember back when a specific channel, you had to put your TV on a specific channel to watch things on the VCR?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So back then,
2000s, baby.
there was one time for a brief time that we had to have it on channel 56, and that was Cartoon Network. So whenever you try to watch a video at night, you turn on Adult Swim. So I was trying to watch a video at night, and I couldn't get it to work, so I got to see part of Inuyasha once, but I was probably too young for it. I mean, it isn't, the world's most horrifying show, but I was still probably too young for it. But the shot where he is stuck to the tree with the arrow, I remembered that because I saw that. It was like the first thing I saw, and I remembered that. And it was really cool. And then I remember remembering it, and then once I saw it again, when I actually started watching the show on Netflix a couple of years ago, I recognized the exact same shot from when I saw it on TV as a little kid.
That's so interesting.
It is.
So it didn't gross you out or anything? Interesting.
Oh no, I thought it was beautiful. The art was lovely, especially
some of the things that you remember, like when you're younger, like you see later. There's like this weird scene. This is totally tirade, but like there was a scene I remember watching. Apparently, it was like a movie in the early 2000s done by Disney about like a kid who became president, about like some Secret Service member who was chasing a kid on a roller rink disguised as like a Coke cup, and he gets like beaten up or something and like falls and like hurts himself. And like I just saw that with no context, like, Mom, was this a movie about like a guy running around with a Coke bottle? I was like, no, that's not real. And I looked it up. It's like, oh, it's from this Kid President Disney movie, you know? I didn't make it up in like a weird fever dream.
Nice. It is funny what sticks with us. But speaking of sticking with us, No Faces will always stick with you as long as you take their money. And this will bring us back around into the fantastical and mysterious world of Spirited Away.
That should be my next Halloween costume. No face.
That'd be creepy.
I gave away like little gold candy, you know?
I can see it now. Unknown podcaster taken to jail for giving random candy to children. Nice. Alright, so moving right along. So Matthew, we actually took some time to actually kind of take apart the movie. So what do you think about Spirited Away? Like like what was your angle for getting into it? Were you looking at the main concept? Were you looking at the conflicts? Were you looking at themes?
Well, Ghibli always impressed me among like other anime in general, and like kind of the way that like the work ethic was in Studio Ghibli. They kind of actually developed during the 70s, 80s, kind of during what some call the Bushido era of Japanese business. So it was like an economic boom, and there was a lot of loyalty that instead of like from the military one generation ago, it was being put into sort of an Americanized business model. And that's when Castle in the Sky came out, and My Neighbor Totoro, and also The Valley of the Wind came out. Those are all like in the 1980s. And if you look at anime in general, even today's anime, it's very hard. They have a very, it's hard to animate to begin with without knowing your stuff. But then
True.
there's the fact that that they really um, paid attention to detail and try their best, and you can tell he doesn't cut corners in what is considered a difficult medium.
So I I agree with the difficult of medium, and I think that's why you would never have a Studio Ghibli series that worked on the same way as a movie. Cause
Even a television show? No, I don't
yeah,
think so.
because it would be the schedule would just be impossible for the level of detail that they would find acceptable.
Oh yeah, and like even among Studio Ghibli films, like I wanted to kind of know like what's more objective. Like I think from a purely Keelian basis, like none maybe would count so much. But among when I was in more of my movie exploring days, Roger Ebert, great movie series, which is about 300 movie canonical movies in. So they include two anime. One was Spirited Away. I think there actually might have been a third one, but another one was actually Grave of the Fireflies, which is not Studio Ghibli, but was well, not Hayao Miyazaki, but was Studio Ghibli.
Okay, I have heard of that one. I have not watched that one either.
It's sad. I don't know if you heard.
Lots of things are said. Oh wait, is that the one about the girl and the boy and one's a ghost and they're in love and somebody's grandparents
No, it's
at a
just about
lake?
ghosts though. You want me to just ruin it?
No, don't ruin it for me.
Okay, it's not a complex plot, but it's not. Yeah, I won't. I guess I won't talk about it.
Not all plots need to be complex.
Yeah, I just don't want to ruin it. But Spirited Away was the top of the list, and another one that came up a lot was Princess Mononoke, and I watched Spirited Away first and Mononoke second. Mononoke was good. It was preachy. It wasn't as deep. It was really well rendered. It's kind of like had a lot of the. It was kind of like a Jedi Geki, like a historical film, but it was kind of like not around, more like around nature rather than like the cities of ancient Japan. And as for Spirited Away, that's probably my favorite, like just animated movie ever. I think it's probably the best use of animation yet, really. That just like if you watch it and you had no idea for other animation films, you kind of put two and two together, be like, oh, this is like the best animation you can get. But that's how I think.
It really was lovely. It was a treat to watch. It was a standard. Um, it was funny though because I think it walked the line. You know, sort of a lot of serious animated movies kind of walk the line between whether they're for adults or for children. And for this one, I honestly don't know. Like
Yeah, I don't know either.
I feel like it would be legitimately disturbing for children. I think.
Well, yeah, maybe under 10, but I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, like maybe not like hide behind the couch distorting, but just like what it implies, and I'm not so
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So moving on, what were some of your thoughts from it? Your critical thoughts, your academic thoughts.
Well, I don't think I'm a crank to think this is a great film. Besides Roger Ebert, it was actually named the best film of the 21st century by the New York Times, I think, in like a couple years ago.
Mm.
Miyazaki, like I said, there's a lot of room for authorship in animation, and Miyazaki wrote, directed, storyboarded the film, and I think he worked alongside animators to make sure they were getting it right, which isn't like really being a control freak as much as like having quality up to standard. And I think he drew concept art for like everything.
It's it's definitely a passion project, I would say, and that shows. It's a passion project, but it's still very polished. But it is undeniably a passion project, and it's so seamless. It makes sense that it would come from the mind of one person, in that it's so seamlessly integrated. Like, even when it follows its own brand of logic, it's still consistent with the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's like kind of the height of speculative fiction in certain ways. I mean, maybe not deep, but just like consistency of mode, I think.
Consistency of mode is a huge aspect of it that I did that makes it easy to become immersed in the story.
I feel like Miyazaki was holding back now because according to them, he scaled back a lot of the story. He said it would be like 3 hours uncut if he decided to produce the original script.
I would like to see it.
I would like to do a video on my channel, Mr. Fiction 1, if anyone's curious, of like what the unmade version of Spirited Away would have been like.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, like, this is kind of like almost one of those movies that never got made because it was so pretentious or too good. But he made it happen, which is amazing to me.
You have to wonder what hasn't been made. Whenever you get into a conflict like that, wondering if something is something too pretentious, because there are films that are too far up their own butts to be quality, or at least have a quality appeal. But once you're able to find the balance of that, you can make something great. But I can't help but wonder what he could have made if there had been no commercial demand.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of examples I could go off of. Like there's a great movie Dune by Alejandro Jodorowsky. You don't know who that is, or do you?
I do actually know who that is.
Yeah, and you've read Dune, so you kind of like know that you can kind of go big on something like that, yet not really be commercially approved of in a way.
Yes, you can certainly go after something for art's sake, and then, of course, there are plenty of art movies that don't do a very good job being art movies either.
Well, yeah, I mean, like this is where I usually talk about a great YouTube channel that does a series called Unmade Masterpieces by a person called a channel called Disregarding Henry, which kind of really tackles all the big ones. There's my favorite one from that channel is called Atopiary, from a guy who did a time travel movie called Shane Carruth. That's probably my number one recommendation for anyone who's listening.
I have never heard of that. I have never heard of any of the things you just said, but it sounds interesting.
It's 235 pages, so I would definitely dedicate reading it like a book. But before you do that, you have to read Titus Grown. But we already discussed that.
True.
But followed by Titus Grown, followed by Atopiary. So the best book ever versus the best unmade movie ever, in that order.
my thought with sort of the general fictive world was my thought was kind of the use of color.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of detail, like an interesting foreshadowing, like within like if you watch it twice, you kind of like get the connections, as well as the fact that he kind of went full on, like he definitely didn't skip, and there's like so much movement and like so much like stuff dedicated to that, you know.
Yeah, but back to color, I'm thinking about, because like sort of like you start out with sort of subdued colors of the
In the real
world.
world.
Yeah, of the real world when they're driving up, and then when they get out and they go through the tunnel turns golden behind them. It's a passage point. It's a self-contained passage point. It goes from dark to gold and back to dark, and then you're out in the open field. Then you're into the real part of the theme park, subdued colors. Then when it comes alive, you get the familiar nighttime colors. You get the comfort of light. But then you have shadows appearing. The shadows take away the comfort of light, and then once they're actually in the spirit world, the colors are so vivid. They're constantly vivid, and even when then you go back to the real world, and everything is again lower. The colors are dimmer. Everything is more downbeat. So it shows.
It's sort of a Wizard of Oz effect in that way.
It's the elevation of the character. It's not like it's almost like they're not so much as jumping between two worlds as they are going outward to one.
Do you think it kind of treating the spirit world as a different character in its own way? That it just has so much liveliness and detail to it that it could kind of have its own character, sort of like, I don't know, Gotham City in the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah, I would say the spirit world could be a character in of itself. Another thing I was thinking about is sort of when it comes to the movie's conflict. I don't know, because I know you were talking about greed as sort of the central conflict.
Greed and human corruption, I think, like, which is seems to be a very big thing for philosopher types in general, I think. I mean, it's not wrong. It's just I think philosopher types focus on it a little bit too much. But at the same time, it's undeniable, and I think that Miyazaki painted consistently throughout. Thing, even if that you could argue that's maybe its sole or main theme, and I don't think it distracted in a preachy way. Like a lot of Miyazaki's movies are very preachy, and I would argue maybe a little bit anti-anthropic to like an unhealthy degree. But I,
As in misanthropic?
yeah, anti against hating pretty much, but
Okay, okay. So misanthropic will be a disliking or a bearing ill will towards humanity as a body.
yes, but I think kind of in yeah, but not here as much, or like not focus on it maybe.
Because I think the main character, her name just went straight out of my head.
Chihiro.
Thank you, Chihiro. Chihiro. Sorry, she I think shows the best of humanity,
Oh yeah, I definitely say that.
and I think that's why she's used as the redemptive figure. Of course, then again, is she though? Because she still needs to have help from the witch,
Well, I think the idea was that
the
she's
other
a
witch.
child who has that, even though it's not from a sort of Rousseauian point that like all humans start off uncorrupted and then become corrupted by losing their status as the noble savage, but that she has been not corrupted with the bad post-war consumerist character of Japan, while her parents, who at the beginning, if you remember, turned to pigs, they have been,
Yes.
and they live a very Western lifestyle. They own a 1998 Audi A5, I think it was. I think we identified this.
Yes, we did some car research because we're nerds that way. Uh, but speaking of which, that was part of the great detail of the movie was the car. I mean that was so impressive.
Anti-lock brakes,
How
a
they
third
animated.
pedal
Yeah,
with manual matic, well, full manual probably.
yeah. So that was really cool.
But they're very Western. They have like a Hawaiian T-shirt and an 1998 Audi A4, and they have credit and debit cards, and they like buffets, and so apparently they're rich too, which is kind of more of a Western character.
Yeah, because I mean, to run a luxury car in Japan is not a cheap feat. Even back then, it was not a cheap feat.
And you know from Hong Kong that like in even outside of cities and like even in rural areas, it kind of costs money to like park a car and to keep it and stuff like that.
Uh, at least in Hong
Urban
Kong,
areas, yeah.
at least in Hong Kong, and from what I heard, what I've learned about modern East Asian culture from literature and culture studies and from people who have been there, I have
Yeah.
heard that it
Also, a
does
smaller
cost a
nation,
lot of
Japan, with like very densely populated in a small area of land. Is the idea.
yeah, yes, because in any place where you're going to have a large population in a small area, such as an island nation like Japan, or in a
Taiwan, South Korea too.
or
So
at least in Hong Kong, land costs a lot more. In America, we have oodles of land. We have land on demand. Forgive the rhyme, but yeah, owning a car and owning a house are very expensive endeavors in a more crowded, urbanized country. We have a lot of rural areas, so I don't think, as someone who has been to East Asia, we don't really get. I mean, this isn't go for everybody, but I think people who at least live in the suburbs don't really get how urbanized cities are there. It's like, I mean, I know Hong Kong is something of an exception because it is a self-contained island city, but at least throughout East Asia that there is extreme urbanization, and
Oh
there's
yeah.
and there's and there's they don't have, at least where I've been in East, there aren't suburbs like we have suburbs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like house ownership, and it's kind of funny that like there's so much. There's a lot of nationalistic guilt, I think, too, on Miyazaki's part because there's so much focus on nature of just his concern about Malthusian overpopulation and the idea that there's some kind of magical number that humans must be reduced to match the animal world, which I don't agree with.
Sorry,
But
what?
I said that there's a sort of naturalistic guilt within my
Nationalistic?
naturalistic guilt.
Oh, naturalistic.
Nationalistic.
Nationalist. Okay,
Yes.
so I'm going to ask a question because a large aspect of Romanticism is nationalism. So the elevation of nature is at least I'm talking about in the original I'm talking about the romantic movie, like the British romanticists, the Irish romanticists. There's a great aspect of national pride or national identity that accompanies that. So do you think that there's a divide here that would stop this film from being called romanticist?
Well, I would think for Miyazaki that he would want nature throughout the world to kind of be flourish and overtake humanity. That he genocidally enough said that he wished that nature would overtake humanity and humans would only dwindle to like 14,000 or something crazy.
That's not terrifying at all. I'd love if I could get a source for that for anybody who's curious about that. I mean, that is
The quote, I am paraphrasing here, but he wanted, the idea was that he wanted humanity to reduce to a magical number because he's afraid of some sort of Malthusian population bomb is kind of the idea. But even if like you think, but you know, what was I gonna say?
I would be interested to see a source for that. So
Well,
we
the
can.
idea was trees good, humans bad. I think was kind of the idea, and
I
that.
didn't know trees could have a moral alignment. I always thought of trees as sort of lawful neutral, but that's just
But I
me.
think some of the idea behind this is that as much as there's nationalistic guilt when his stories are placed in the real world, when it's in the fantastical world, it's sort of like the humans that are the oppressors and the nature that's the oppressed, especially in Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, which what I've noticed. I think you watched that with me, didn't you?
I did not watch Nazca Valley of the Wind with you. I watched Totoro and Castle in the Sky with you.
So my answer to that is that his love of nature isn't necessarily nationalistic, just there's a nationalistic guilt that Japan was corrupted by Western influences, and now we have no respect for nature. As of before that, there's a belief that everything had a kami in it or a spirit, and that
Shintoism. I mean, a deeply interconnected natural world. Sort of the existence of nature itself. I would
yeah, and that's what the
also sort
spirit.
of extending to the actual nationality of like not the nationality, the existence of
But
being Japan was part of a whole spiritualistic framework that
oh yeah, like the emperor
it built
was
a
God
mythic
and stuff,
background.
and yeah, like because the emperor was
Mm-hmm.
God and like stuff like that, and there was like they were the divine race descended of the sun goddess, I believe.
Yeah, Amaterasu. It's Shinto folklore is fascinating because it's so comprehensive. The
It's
mythology of Shintoism is just so. If anybody has a chance to read about that please do. It's very fascinating.
well, that's actually what they said. Spirited Away was going for here because uh, Chihiro kind of goes into the old style pre-war spirit world that her grandparents probably believed in more. That like here's the river spirit and here's the sky spirit and stuff, and here's all the old spirits of nature together in this bathhouse, like how it should be. And Miyazaki really, he was born in the 30s, so he would kind of remember these old style spiritualization of literally rocks, you know, even so.
Yeah, or the I'm thinking of the corrupted water spirit.
Oh yeah, the Corolla Bicycle have him. They think he's
Yeah,
a sing spirit, but he's actually a river spirit that got polluted.
yeah. Uh, for me, the thing that struck me the most, I was thinking, I actually saw this as the how do I say this? The thing I got from this was I interpret it somewhat as a battle between the individual and the collective. I thought of it as sort of a presenting both the dangers and like the pros and the cons of individualism versus collectivism. We have Chihiro. She is a heroic character who breaks herself away from a group to be an individual hero, versus we see groups of people constantly getting up to sort of mischief, bad things like greed when No Face comes, or her parents. But then again, that does flip around because the main villain is an individual, but also the character who provides the most good things is an individual. And when freed from the influence, like towards the end when they celebrate her picking the right pigs, or not picking the right pigs, rather, they sort of are free of that individual influence. So I thought there was a dialogue, not a dialogue, sort of a push and pull between the good things about collectivism, the bad things about collectivism, the good things about individualism, and the bad things about individualism. And with the bad things of individualism, you have consumerism and, to some extent, greed. Not saying that individualism and greed are the same thing, but
Because it can be argued that consumerism is an attempt to model yourself against the faceless collective in order to achieve a standard of popularity by partaking in a common culture of things.
but in your own unique way, so it doesn't give the illusion of being part of a collective.
Yeah, it's individualism disguised as it's collectivism disguised as individualism.
That's what marketing is. I took a course on the philosophy of fashion a couple of years ago.
Apparently paid off.
It did. There are some things to fashion where I think the philosopher didn't do a real good job in his book, but he did. But I did learn some things from that class, and one of them was, even though we only talked about it a little bit, so it's not supposed to be the real point, was the tribalism of clothes. That is sort of a growing aspect too. Is the
Oh yeah,
idea
and
of
you went to New
tribalism.
York of all places for your museum trip for this, I think, right?
Yeah. Yes, you remember that. Um, but there is sort of fashion is something that people can be tribal about because you have a subgroup, but you have a collective subgroup. So you're an individualized subgroup.
Oh yeah, you got like your hipsters in Greenwich Village, and you have your goths at your clubs, and you kind of like your barflies at your bar, and
Yeah.
It's a personality type thing too. But at the same time, they say like, oh, if you're this personality type, you should probably wear this, even though it's not really directly said, but that's the message behind it.
Yeah, there is a message to a lifestyle associated with a brand, and it's a form of induced collective thought.
Yeah.
Marketing's a little bit scary.
And you made me feel 0% better by being a partial business major.
Sorry. Hey,
It's fine.
no, business is great. I think enterprise is, I think sort of an ideal of ethical enterprise would be Mr. Fezziwig from Christmas Carol. The
Oh no, you're right.
what one does not just go into business to make money, but to preserve a way of life, and that's a very rather altruistic way. I mean, obviously you do need to make money, but
But you also help people, I would argue.
yeah, definitely. Commerce helps a ton of people.
Oh yeah, like Bill Gates. You know, there's a difference between capitalism and consumerism here. Like,
Yes, there is.
because you could. It's definitely arguable that Bill Gates helped people 10 times better than Mother Teresa ever did, and like, really, I don't mean to be political here, but it's kind of why I think the Protestant work ethic is superior to almsgiving of the Catholic sort. Even though I think you kind of both but almsgiving is more of a personal thing, but at the same time, it's also good societally because some people just can't get jobs. It does make sense in a balanced perspective.
I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say. Sorry.
Like, you can't just be one or the other. You can't be all like capitalism or no almsgiving. Like, and I think that the Protestant work ethic kind of like established that society.
Oh, okay. I think I get where you're going.
Yeah.
That was part of the Reformation that came about. The idea of commerce was a big part of the because when you had the rise of Martin Luther, you had the idea that any work could be done to the glory of God. So there was sort of the one could, go out and make money and still be an ethical person and not be a noble. So
And people, it was before people even understood that really it was technically better because it created wealth, even though they weren't at that point yet. And then you have America, where you have, forget his name, I think he might have been like Jamestown, like he that does not work shall not eat.
and so I think that I forget. Oh, there was such an interesting book. I forget what it was, but it was one that it was talking about basically the ideas of Martin Luther and Germany, other Germans at that time, which kind of indirectly led just sort of towards the idea of the American Republic. I think that's kind of where it started. Well,
Honestly, if I could do a biopic on one person, even though he wouldn't necessarily be number one, and I say this as a non-Lutheran, would
mhm.
probably be Martin Luther. Maybe more like an art house film than the 2003 movie, kind of like a Protestant version of Andrei Rublev or something, like in black and white and long takes. But I don't know.
That could be fascinating. An intriguing man.
You ever watch Andrei Rublev?
No, I did not.
Yeah, it's about an Eastern Orthodox painter in Russia who paints icons. I'm not Eastern Orthodox, but for someone who kind of knows the religion a bit better now and just likes history a little bit and loves movies and loves Tarkovsky, who actually made a religious movie in the Soviet Union, which is very impressive.
That is impressive.
It's a great movie. I don't agree with it theologically, and it can be very, very boring at times, but technically great and a template for all religious films, in my opinion.
Intriguing. Well, St. John of Damascus, thank you for sticking around so we could have this movie. How do you want to move the discussion? Do you have more to say about Spirited Away, or are you good to move on
Oh,
to
definitely.
question?
The only thing that I couldn't. Let me just look at my notes real quick. Oh,
Sure.
The way that I kind of interpreted what you're talking about, like collectivism versus individualism, was more like maturity childhood. That
Interesting.
I don't think it really negates what you're saying necessarily, but it definitely was in there. Like Chihiro is like whiny and not happy about what she's doing
She
throughout the movie.
is. She does have some whiny tendencies.
Now, according to Miyazaki, that if she said something like "I don't want to do this" or "I want to go home," that she would have basically been killed or something to that extent.
Well, that escalated quickly.
I don't know if he said killed exactly. I am not remembering my Miyazaki quotes very well tonight, but
How dare you? You don't carry a Miyazaki quote book with you?
no, it
Shame.
was in my. I think I have one in my smaller catechism. No.
What denomination is that?
But anyway, that before she's mature and like during the course of the film, she gets a job, she learns to work, to basically sit down and shut up or stand up, if you will, because she's cleaning the bathhouses for all the patrons, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, she's cleaning the bathhouses.
But she goes from what? You found an interesting connection in your
I
mind?
did. I was thinking because if you're talking about sort of, could it be seen as a child's journey to maturity, fantasized, made a fantasy, as in there's a very interesting video by Matt Colville. He's a writer. He's also a dungeon master. He does some very interesting videos, and he did one that was fantasy versus fiction. And when you talk about fantasy, where the world reflects the internal conflict of the characters, could we see Chihiro's journey from child to adult? It's sort of sowing her getting a job,
Well, what I saw.
learning
Oh,
how
I'm
to
sorry.
hold a job, making friends, falling in love, and then returning as older to save her parents.
Well, I kind of saw it as more as that she learns to be mature, but then she realized that she is in a fantastical world of her own, and then she returns as a child, only more mature, to have a sort of second childhood for the time that she was in the fantasy world, where she doesn't age, but she sees the fantastic in the real world now from having matured in the fantasy world, and it almost makes it an anti-escapism movie of sorts in
Hmm.
sort of Keelian sense, where instead of just running to fantasy as what he calls a panic blanket, as having it sort of as a one of maturity that can teach and explore themes and be deep, and not just fantasy fiction in general, but just like a way of life of constant improvement and not running from your troubles and not being the neckbeard down your mom's basement who plays World of Warcraft, but being the, I don't know, the engineering student who gets B's and A's.
I do think there is a calling of speculative fiction to reflect on the real world.
Keelian phrase, you said speculative fiction. I trained you well.
Speculative fiction's a blanket term.
Yes, it is. But
It's
Keelian,
yeah,
I use it a lot.
yeah, it's a publishing term. But for speculative fiction, it does reflect the it does reflect the cares of the real world, and I think that's why some people find it so tiresome. Like I know we talked last episode about why I found science fiction right now so tiresome, because everybody is trying to rewrite 1984 with a female protagonist. Not that there's anything wrong
Well,
with
true though.
updating 1984. Not there's anything wrong with writing a great female protagonist.
Well, we
Heaven
both
knows
know
we need them,
well,
but
we both know that 1984's only improvement so far has been Brazil anyway. So
1984's only improvement was 1984. But see, I'm not. If you read the back,
I
it's
like
all
Brazil.
very similar. Oh, I did like Brazil. I just don't know if I liked it better than 1984, as in 1984 the book.
Oh, of course.
But they all are. It's 19. Like there was one book that I saw that was very different from that. Not 1984 with Katniss Everdeen as the lead character. There was one that was different. It did have a female lead, but it was different. It was about building families in sort of building a family from people who don't know each other in outer space, like on a long journey. I don't remember what it was called. The guy at the bookstore saw me looking at it and he said it was really good and it was really different. The word different. The one thing that I do worry about, sorry, this is a complete rabbit trail, I'm sorry, but the one thing about speculative fiction is when it's dealing with issues of its time, if it deals with the same issue in the same manner, which is something that thought I I thought about science fiction also. Kind of something that happened with science fiction in the earlier 60s through 80s, I guess. The idea of sort of mass extinction events and nuclear war with Russia.
Yeah.
Those were common themes because that's what people were worried about. But when someone is able to, I would say that I don't know about this book, but the building of family and community that's dealing with anti-isolation, which is a growing problem. So it's dealing with a problem that we face, alienation, but it's looking at it in a different way than all the other ones that are about Katniss Everdeen overthrowing Big Brother or the patriarchy or whatever they are. Because this is entirely going off of Dust Jacket observations, but when somebody's able to look outside of the genre and flip an issue that's popular in the genre, that shows a writer who not only cares about their work, but is aware of the state of their genre.
But I don't. But I think that it can be kind of misused to mean mere contrarianism. I know you would never do that, but I would expand the criteria to more Keelian way for consistency's sake. That uh, both genre fiction and the way contemporary fiction is doesn't have to be a straitjacket, but at the same time can be used to tell a deep story. Like Watchmen took 80s superhero comics and made Watchmen. And talking about 1960s apocalyptic victim, Anna Kavan took that genre and made the novel Ice, which I really want to buy, which is science fiction that I saw in a bookstore, like you're talking about, that I really
Mm-hmm.
want to buy. But you're definitely right. We can take genre fiction and we can give it wings, essentially.
Take genre fiction, give it wings, and write. I know this was a rant that got edited out of the last episode, but if there is one thing that made me happy going through the fantasy and science fiction, like sort of like going through the science fiction section, especially. It was like the majority of the books that I looked through the Dust Jacket had female leads, which is really cool in such a male-dominated genre for so long. The problem was they all sounded like the exact same character.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was a lot of smut and identity politics, which is another problem with having female characters. But and fiction in general. Thank you, Game of Thrones, for that.
as in hypersexualization, even when you're supposed to, even when you're trying to write a series. Yeah, there actually there were. So you know like when you look at bad 80s sci-fi and it talks about like the male lead in like a weird sexual way.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. So
I don't listen to a lot of pulp, but so it sounds like
I've
you
read a
have.
lot of paperbacks, but the the, the thing is like that is like something that is considered by I think most critics to be kind of like a ew thing.
Yeah.
That's still happening even, but now it's across both genres, and I actually I really don't think that's a positive thing. It wasn't a positive thing before, and it's I think spreading that equilateral like to have like talking about like pretty blatant sexual concepts like even on the back of a book that it's like it's not even if it's not part of if it doesn't grow the actual plot then that's it's there are some things that are beneficial to be how much I say this like I think equality is beneficial in most things. This just isn't beneficial in any way to the state of fiction.
Well, like I said, thank you, Game of Thrones. I mean, how do you think some of these publishers get? I'm not saying they edited this into it, but like, how do you think some of these people sold so many copies? You know, like you had to like put in that stuff sometimes. I don't know.
Bread circuses, breads and circuses. But sorry, that was my entire digression about just like oh no my depressing visit to a bookstore in Princeton.
Well, I just have one last point here. I was just going to say that I really like how, and I think this is kind of unique to Miyazaki films in general. It's always lifted me up no matter what mood I'm in. The kind of dream speak that was present in Spirited Away that you said kind of is in Irish fiction. I think you had a different name for it, but also the concept of Ma, where kind of like the characters like they don't sit around, but they kind of have silent space and almost no movement. It's kind of realistic, but like it can't necessarily be used there. It's very good. You have to have very good timing for that. It just I can't explain it. It's one of the reasons it contributes to being my favorite animated film of all time.
There's always something a little off about it.
Off as in what?
Like off as in it's immersive, but like the movement and the dial. I think this is what you're saying. Is the movement and the dialogue? They always do feel a little dreamy, as in it's it looks real. It kind of feels real, but it's you kind of know, but you know instinctively that it isn't quite real. Like
Yeah, but not in the uncanny valley early 2000s and 90s CGI in live action movie kind of unreal.
I don't even know if I would say that, but it's like there's a difference in how the characters behave between the spirit world and the real world.
Oh yeah, I meant, of course.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to say about the movie? You had any extra thoughts?
Any extra thoughts? I would say that I really do recommend it. It's adorable. It's the voice acting is. I don't know about the American dub because we watched the sub version.
Yeah, the American dubs, because Disney does it, are done very well.
I would very much like to see that because I'm definitely kind of a dub person. But it's a really good movie. It is best enjoyed while eating sushi. Can tell you that.
I can also sort of add to that, but I had mostly not sushi. But I'm definitely glad we planned that too when we watched it.
That was fun. All right, so do you have any questions before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, I do. You want me to be first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. Open up my jar that you can't see of questions. It's real. So why do you like fantasy?
Why do I like fantasy? That's a great question. I think that it is. Why do I like fantasy so much? I won't lie and say that escapism is a part of that, the withdrawal from the real. But I will go back to that
It's
video I
not
was
just
saying about.
simulation for it, is it?
What was that?
It's not just simulation for you, is it?
No, it isn't, because I think that video I mentioned earlier, the one about Matt Colville, fiction versus fantasy, is fantasy allows you to explore concepts like the inner struggle in a colossal way. Fantasy gives your imagine of all the kinds of fiction, fantasy gives you the largest parameters to fulfill. It's the freest, and I think it has the richest tradition because it is so connected to our human folklore. Your character can be almost anything you want it to be. You have to, while you should stay within your world's logic, it gives your character the power to be almost anything they can be. It also suits itself very well just to my natural interests. It is both an escape and a tie back to the real world. And once you have both, you can create a well-balanced fantasy, one that helps you escape from your problems in the real world, but face them in an inner setting.
So you definitely would say that like the possibilities of it, like, but you say you're more like personal rather like me. I'm like, oh, all these genre possibilities, like the Left Hand of Darkness, Slug Lagoon, and Titus Groan and all that. But I can understand the other two.
Yeah, it is a genre of great detail, great personality, and I think when we get into sort of the variety, the one thing is that sometimes variety does tend to suffer because some people keep trying to rewrite the Lord of the Rings.
Ah, you finally admitted it. But I think
Oh
you kind
no,
of
oh no,
for it.
people do try to rewrite it constantly, uh, but I there
Making copy machines is what J.G. Keeley, the phrase J.G. Keeley uses.
it's yeah, because there's only one person who can do Tolkien. Tolkien.
There's also a lot of Conan
Yeah,
copies too, from what I understand.
yeah. From the lower fantasy tradition, there are a lot of Conan continuations.
A lot of
That
good stuff, you know.
that was more. That's not something we see a lot of now. It's more of a
Oh yeah, that's
older thing.
yeah.
Like I think like 80s, 70s, 80s fantasy was very Conan oriented, and today is, though I think fantasy has been a little bit removed from this, more than science fiction, but I do worry about fantasy getting that same mold that I talked about with science fiction, the post-apocalyptic 1984 Katniss Everdeen archetype, which I think Katniss is actually a pretty fascinating archetype. The question is just, I don't know if it's been done right yet.
Hmm.
I might not have read enough into dystopian literature just because it doesn't interest me that much. But sort of that the dystopian spunky female hero is an archetype that comes back frequently. But I haven't found one that's been arresting.
Hmm.
I I I, I I'm just thinking about the different ones that I've read, and because I very much want there to be one, because I think it's an incredible character possibility.
Well, it definitely sounds like a personal thing of you. I mean, like,
That is a personal
it
thing
isn't
for me.
really for me. Isn't really my thing so much. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not into identity politics either. But without spoiling too much, I am writing something, and it features a non-white character as my main character, and a sort of a secondary character who isn't white either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting writing that because like it really you don't write too much except there's slight cultural differences. It's pretty interesting. But
But if I remember correctly, you were talking about people who have been fairly westernized.
yes,
So
but
so and that would make
and
these
have
films.
reacted against certain modes of culture in a more contrarian way in the case that I'm writing.
Yeah, I do know you've done a lot of research, which is something that you do have to
Oh, I
do.
haven't done that much research. Sort of. I'm trying to. Yeah, I wouldn't say too much research.
the one thing that I think fantasy does offer over science fiction, sorry, just going back to the point, is that you can explore topics without baggage. Science fiction, you still can't quite escape the baggage because usually you're still dealing with an earlier human history, so there's still going to be baggage of things.
That's true. Yeah.
So in fantasy, you can remove yourself from the baggage or present the baggage in a different light to
In
show
allegory or what?
not I would stay away from allegory, but I would say that you can base things off certain like historical events. Like you can reframe something to get somebody to think about it a different way.
Yeah.
Like you could use Stormcloaks and the Grey Elves to show racism in a way that's not tied to any concept of you showing the same concept of something that humans have to deal with,
Oh yeah.
but
Well, I got that.
in a way that's not attached to any one group
We'll
in
call
the
it
real
the
world.
we'll call it the Zootopia effect. That's our
The
newest term for
Zootopia
2019.
effect, I like because it takes an actual problem in the real world and puts it into a frame of reference that makes people think about it a different way. That's actually a really good idea.
Our first term of 2019.
Huzzah! Okay, so oh dear,
So
we're running a little
you can do
long.
your next. Well, you can just have your next question.
Sure. My question would actually be to you about sort of about Spirited Away. When it comes to how Spirited Away presents um, its spiritual culture, it shows a big difference between spiritual culture and human culture, right? What other films have you seen that de- demonstrate? How am I trying to ask this? Because like I only made a quick note to remind you to ask this question, but I didn't say how I was going to word it. Sorry. So when seeing that difference between the spiritual culture and the human culture, what are some films you think do an excellent job showing an alternative culture outside of humans and presenting it in a human way?
Um, I can't really think of like a. This is kind of. Oh, um, it's funny. Fantasy like really isn't like a big thing with like films. I think it's very underwritten. For science fiction, I really can't think of any.
Okay.
Um, but for I think like one world contrasts to another, especially in anime, I would go for Satoshi Kon's Paprika, the dream world versus the real world, and how they kind of mesh together, especially during the ending part of the film, is very interesting.
That's the TV one, right?
No, it's a movie.
No, no, I mean it's like the one where people are getting sucked in and out of the TVs, or people are coming in and out. Or am I?
No,
Okay, I'm.
there's a device that they use during the film called DC Mini, which is kind of like the Inception device in Inception, but you basically go into people's dream world is the idea.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. That's interesting. And so, what about that movie? Kind of made the spiritual world or the inner world different from the outer world.
Basically, no limits, I would say, like
Okay.
LSD and psychotropics in a way, but probably on par with Spirit Away with detail. I would say maybe slightly surpassing it if it could be believed.
Wow. All right. So I think that's where we're going to wrap up this episode.
I do have one more
Oh,
question.
sure. Hit me with it.
A movie that deserves a remake?
A movie that just deserves to be remade in general.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Top one that's hitting me right away, I think, would be Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
It'd be hard to keep that bipartisan today, though.
It
My
would
only
be, but
point.
I think if you did manage to keep it as truly bipartisan and more about ethics rather than politics, if you manage to keep it an ethical drama.
Hmm. Well, to quote my libertarian hippie Catholic philosophy professor, love always ends up being partisan. So good luck with that.
Fantastic. All right, and my last question for
We
you.
defended Catholics, didn't we?
Uh, hopefully not. I mean, you did. I don't know if I didn't.
Some nun in Western Ireland just body slammed her laptop.
That escalated quickly. Speaking of which, if you could visit any place in the stories that we've talked about, this is my second question for you. If you could visit any place in the stories that we've talked about throughout this podcast, what would it be?
Nobody might get this yet because kind of screwed up, but Elfland I think is pretty fair. What do you say?
Yeah, Elfland would be pretty cool. That would be Elfland from Lord Dunsany's fantastic work, the King of Elfland's Daughter.
Which is our next episode, by the way.
Hopefully. If we ever have a thing called the Lost episodes, that'll be on it. All right, so I think that's going to wrap us up for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. It's very cold outside right now, up where we are, and good night.